What is culture? But to be more specific, what exactly does the word culture really mean? The word culture originated in Latin as early as the 15th century and was used to denote a cultivated piece of land. The word they used, however, was collere, meaning to cultivate. This was adopted in Middle English with a similar meaning of cultivation of the soil. And from this, in early 16th century, arose cultivation of the mind, faculties, or manners. However, only in the 19th century was the term culture truly adopted instead of the more outdated use of collere, as it was thought to have been paraphrased or abbreviated into culture. With the use case adapted in the 19th century to both a verb and a noun, culture became to either cultivate soil or crop, or the set of shared attitudes, values, goals, and practices that characterize an institution or organization, or the customary beliefs, social forms, and material traits of a racial, religious, or social group, or enlightenment and excellence and taste acquired by intellectual or aesthetic training, or cultivation of expert care and training. But how would other people define it?
Culture are the values that society holds on the individual. My culture is my family.
I feel like a tradition in kind of the way people live amongst a group of people.
Culture is like a covalent bond, you know. They're hard to break. It brings everyone together, and it's inseparable. Once you get attached to a culture, it's just everything feels right. You know when you found it, because we may be different, but at the end of the day, opposites attract.
This is our modern understanding of culture. However, having all these definitions becomes a little convoluted. However, I designed my own amalgamation of a definition that I use based on all these noun use cases. Here is my definition. Culture is a term used to refer to all traditions, customs, ideologies, and values of a group of people at a particular time. As you can see, my own definition is pretty good. Scars would agree. Theirs is pretty similar to mine. I put the official document here for you to see. It was a little long, so I took out the parts that I thought would be most important to defining culture. Culture is understood as a framework of which things come to be seen as having meaning. Culture is the lens of which people see, think, interpret the world, and experience, make assumptions about themselves and others, and finally, understand and represent community and cultural identity. Summarized, culture is a lens we adopt to influence how people see, think, and interpret the world and their experiences. It also is a lens we use to make assumptions about ourselves and others, and also enables us to understand our own communities and others, and in turn express and represent our own cultural identity. Great! So now you know what Scarza wants. So now let me show you how you can potentially use it. There are two very simple ways. Representation of culture in the text and representation of culture in relation to context. Now I'll take you through both of these. First, I'll start with representation of culture in the text. Understanding culture is a key concept in Unit 3. Writing a post-colonial reading requires a student to have an understanding of colonial and post-colonial Australian culture, as well as requiring them to be able to identify how a representation is constructed within their text. For example, No Sugar and Remembering Babylon both contain representations of white and Aboriginal Australian culture, which can be analysed and used directly as evidence within a response. An example being white colonial Australian culture shown in No Sugar. Neil, a white man, is more interested in controlling the people in his care than helping them. He attempts to use access to language and information as a way to oppress the Millamarras and other Aboriginal groups, and keep them from gaining power or influence. You might argue that the author depicts this white man as having an ill moral compass and oppressing and taking from black people, representative of white colonial culture. The second use is in relation to context. When reading a text, we understand that a text does not exist void of context. Understanding the cultures surrounding a text production, reception, and setting can help a reader better understand the text as a whole. For example, understanding the culture of Romanticism and industrialization in relation to the text Frankenstein can help the reader understand the characters within the text or ideas represented within the text. For example, the common archetype of an anti-hero can be seen in the main character of Victor, which was a characteristic of Romantic literary culture. So now, I'll take you through what exactly these uses may look like in an intro paragraph. But before we jump in, we must find a question to answer. But what questions are applicable? Well, actually quite a few. Turns out culture is a widely applicable term and can easily make your response sound more sophisticated. I searched through a range of exam papers and each one has at least 3 questions in which you could use your understanding of the concept of culture. Some key terms that you can look for to find these questions include culture, society, context, values and attitudes or ideologies, representations, and finally, national or Australian identity. Now onto the preparation for our essay. I chose the question, discuss the ways a literary text reflects an understanding and appreciation of diversity within a culture. Right, So now we have to choose our appropriate text. In this case, Remembering Babylon. Why this text? Well, it displays exactly what we need for this question. A dream of diversity and representations of both Australian and Aboriginal culture. Next step, choose your evidence. In this case, as I just said prior, our dream of diversity is from Mr. Fraser, our representation of Australian culture is from chapter 18, and our representation of Aboriginal culture is from the spiritual explanation of Jemmy's past memories from the Aboriginal people. So now we can combine what we have and make our intro paragraph. Step 1. We can either start it with the boring David Malouf's 1993 work, Remembering Babylon, stands as a quintessential post-colonial narrative, or we can make a little hook to hook in our audience. For example, a quote. One of his eyebrows was missing. Strange how unimportant eyebrows are, as long as there's two of them. Yes, this relates perfectly to our text, and it's also part of the text. Now, add a little link to that to make them connect. The synopsis and the hook, and that adds a little bit of interest and also keeps your market engaged right before they read the rest of the essay. And then we can do a brief summary or synopsis of the text, or just what is needed for your essay. The novel tells the story of Jemmy, an outcast from both Aboriginal and white Australian society. The novel doesn't merely present a story, it presents the complex fact of Jemmy's attempted reintegration into frontier culture. Jemmy is presented as neither part of a white or Aboriginal culture, but is also treated as if he's part of both groups. And with this interesting concept, Malouf explores diversity, or lack thereof, within frontier culture, and presents a reader with the idea that culture doesn't have to be singular, but rather it can be a delicate balance of many cultures. Next, we can add our thesis. Malouf achieves this through spiritual representations of Aboriginal Australian culture, romanticised classic representation of English culture / Australian, and through Mr. Fraser's belief in the beauty of both, and his vision for the future of diversity. As you can see, I use a representation of culture in text for my response. However, also notice the question doesn't merely ask for just how culture is represented. In each paragraph, I'll be sure to reference how representations influenced my understanding of cultural diversity. Furthermore, just because the question talks about cultural diversity doesn't mean the book has to contain it. A lack of cultural diversity within a culture can still influence our interpretation of it. Great, now we have our intro complete. Slap that into GPT and, oh, the internet's out? Okay, then grab your favorite suppression force, go unlock the basement, and give it to a willing participant and allow them to elaborate on your intro. And boom, now you have your very own essay through the use of the concept of culture. I hope this was informative, and please read your information form if you got lost somewhere. Thank you for listening.